The rain poured mercilessly over the dilapidated streets of Mexico City, mirroring the tears that streamed down Esperanza Fuentes' face. At 32, she was a shell of the vibrant woman she once was, beaten down by years of emotional abuse and neglect from her husband, the wealthy and ruthless business tycoon, Alejandro Montero. Esperanza clutched her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders as she trudged through the muddy streets. The dim light from the street lamps cast eerie shadows, making her feel even more alone in this cruel world. She had just been thrown out of her own home, a lavish mansion that never felt like hers, by Alejandro, who had accused her of being worthless and incapable of bearing him an heir. "You're nothing but a burden, Esperanza." Alejandro's words echoed in her mind, each syllable a dagger to her heart. "I should have listened to my mother and married Catalina instead. At least she would have given me strong sons by now." Esperanza's sobs were drowned out by a clap of thunder. She found herself in front of a small, run-down apartment building, the home of her childhood friend, Lucia Hernandez. With trembling hands, she knocked on the door. Lucia's eyes widened in shock as she took in Esperanza's bedraggled appearance. "Dios mío! Esperanza, what happened to you?" As Esperanza collapsed into her friend's arms, the story spilled out between heart-wrenching sobs. Lucia listened, her face a mix of sympathy and barely contained rage. "That bastard!" Lucia exclaimed, her fists clenched. "How dare he treat you like this? You, who have given up everything for him." Esperanza shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. Perhaps he's right, Lucia. Maybe I am worthless. I couldn't even give him a child." Lucia grabbed Esperanza by the shoulders, forcing her to meet her gaze. "Listen to me, Mija. You are not worthless. You are kind, intelligent, and beautiful. Alejandro is a fool who doesn't deserve you." As Lucia helped Esperanza settle into her tiny spare room, neither woman could have imagined the earth-shattering events that were about to unfold, events that would shake the very foundations of their world and bring long-buried secrets to light. Across town, in the opulent Montero mansion, Alejandro paced in his study, a glass of whiskey in hand. His handsome face was contorted with a mix of anger and something that, if one looked closely, resembled regret. Señor Montero, his faithful butler, Javier, interrupted hesitantly. "Your mother is on the phone. She wants to know if you've finally gotten rid of Dona Esperanza." Alejandro's grip tightened on the glass. "Tell her it's done. Esperanza is gone." As Javier nodded and retreated, Alejandro's gaze fell on a faded photograph hidden behind newer, glossier ones on his desk. It showed a younger version of himself, arm in arm with Esperanza, both of them beaming with love and hope. "What happened to us, mi amor?" he whispered, a lone tear escaping down his cheek. But as quickly as the moment of vulnerability came, it passed. Alejandro's face hardened once more, and he downed the rest of his whiskey in one gulp. Little did he know that fate had other plans that would force him to confront the consequences of his cruelty and the true value of the woman he had cast aside. The next morning dawned gray and gloomy, much like Esperanza's spirits. She sat at Lucia's small kitchen table, clutching a cup of coffee, her eyes red and puffy from a night of tears. "What will I do now, Lucia?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I have nothing. No money, no skills. Alejandro made sure I was completely dependent on him." Lucia's eyes flashed with determination. "You have me, amiga. And you have strength you don't even know about yet. We'll figure this out together." As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Lucia opened it to find a nervous-looking young man in a courier's uniform. "I have a delivery for Señora Esperanza Montero," he announced, holding out a small, weathered box. Esperanza approached cautiously, her brow furrowed in confusion. "That's me, but who could be sending me anything?" She signed for the package and brought it to the table. With trembling hands, she opened it, gasping as she pulled out an old, yellowed envelope. It's my grandmother's handwriting," she whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. Lucia leaned in, her curiosity piqued. "Your grandmother? But didn't she pass away years ago?" Esperanza nodded, carefully opening the fragile envelope. "Yes, when I was just a child. I barely remember her." As she unfolded the letter inside, a small key fell out, clattering onto the table. Esperanza picked it up, turning it over in her palm as she began to read aloud. "My dearest Esperanza, if you are reading this, then I am long gone, and the time has come for you to know the truth about your heritage and the power that lies within you. The key enclosed with this letter opens a safety deposit box at the Banco Nacional de Mexico. What you find there will change everything. Remember, mi Nina, you come from a long line of strong, courageous women. No matter what life throws at you, never forget your worth. You are destined for greatness. With all my love, Abuela Rosa." Esperanza's hands shook as she finished reading, her mind reeling with questions. "I don't understand. What truth? What power?" Lucia's eyes sparkled with excitement. "There's only one way to find out. We need to go to that bank." As the two friends prepared to leave, neither could shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something monumental. Across town, in his lavish office, Alejandro Montero was about to receive news that would send him on a desperate quest, one that would force him to confront the terrible mistake he had made in casting aside the only woman who had ever truly loved him. The wheels of fate had begun to turn, setting in motion a series of events that would expose long-buried secrets, ignite passionate rivalries, and ultimately lead to a shocking revelation that would change Esperanza's life forever. As Esperanza and Lucia stepped out into the bustling streets of Mexico City, little did they know that every step they took was bringing them closer to a truth so explosive, it would shake the very foundations of their world. The journey ahead would be fraught with danger, betrayal, and unexpected alliances, but it would also hold the key to Esperanza's true destiny, a destiny that would see her rise from the ashes of despair to claim her rightful place in a world that had once sought to crush her spirit. The stage was set for a tale of epic proportions, a story of love lost and found, of secrets unveiled, and of a woman's incredible journey from despair to triumph. As Esperanza clutched the mysterious key to her chest, she felt a spark of hope ignite within her heart. For the first time in years, she dared to dream of a future where she was more than just the woman despised by her husband. She was Esperanza Fuentes, and her story was only just beginning. The bustling streets of Mexico City seemed to pulse with an energy that matched Esperanza's racing heart as she and Lucia made their way to the Banco Nacional de Mexico. The weight of the small key in her pocket felt like a promise of a future she had never dared to imagine. "What do you think we'll find?" Lucia asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Esperanza shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, but I can feel it in my bones, Lucia. Whatever is in that safety deposit box will change everything." As they approached the imposing bank building, neither woman noticed the sleek black car that pulled up across the street, nor the man with piercing eyes who watched their every move from behind tinted windows. Inside the bank, Esperanza's hands trembled as she presented the key to a stern-faced clerk. I believe my grandmother left something for me here," she stammered, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Her name was Rosa Fuentes." The clerk's eyebrows shot up in recognition. "Ah, Senora Rosa Fuentes. Of course. Please, follow me." As Esperanza and Lucia were led into a private room, the atmosphere grew thick with anticipation. The clerk returned moments later with a dusty metal box, placing it reverently on the table before them. "Take as much time as you need, Senora," he said with a slight bow before leaving them alone. Esperanza's fingers trembled as she inserted the key. With a soft click, the lock opened, and she slowly lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a collection of items that at first glance seemed unremarkable: an old leather-bound journal, a string of pearls, and a faded photograph. But as Esperanza lifted the journal, a gasp escaped her lips. Tucked within its pages was a document that made her blood run cold. "Dios mío," she whispered, her face pale. "Lucia, look at this." Lucia leaned in, her eyes widening as she read the ornate script on the yellowed paper. It's a deed. To the Montero estate?" Esperanza nodded, her mind reeling. "According to this, my grandmother was the rightful owner of everything Alejandro claims as his birthright. But how? Why?" As if in answer to her questions, a letter fluttered from the pages of the journal. Esperanza caught it midair, her heart pounding as she recognized her grandmother's handwriting once more. "My dearest Esperanza, if you're reading this, then the time has come for you to learn the truth about our family's legacy, a truth that has been buried for far too long. The Montero fortune was built on a lie. Your grandfather, Miguel Fuentes, was the true visionary behind the Montero Empire. He and Alejandro's grandfather, Fernando Montero, were once the closest of friends and business partners. But Fernando was consumed by greed. He betrayed Miguel, stealing his ideas and pushing him out of the company they had built together. Your grandfather died of a broken heart, but not before entrusting me with the truth and the evidence to prove it. I've spent years gathering more proof, all of which you'll find in this box. I know you married Alejandro Montero. I pray he is a better man than his grandfather, but if he is not, know that you have the power to reclaim what is rightfully ours. The future of our family's legacy rests in your hands now, mi Nina. Be brave. Be strong. And above all, be just. With all my love, Abuela Rosa." Esperanza's hands shook as she finished reading, tears streaming down her face. Lucia wrapped her arms around her friend, her own eyes glistening with emotion. "Oh, Esperanza," she breathed. "Do you know what this means?" Before Esperanza could respond, the door burst open. There, his face a mask of fury and disbelief, stood Alejandro Montero. "What are you doing here?" he snarled, his eyes darting between Esperanza and the contents of the safety deposit box. "What is all this?" Esperanza stood tall, a fire igniting in her eyes that Alejandro had never seen before. "This, Alejandro, is the truth. The truth about your family's fortune and mine." Across town, in a dimly lit office, a phone rang. A gnarled hand picked it up, the voice on the other end speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "Senora Montero, we have a problem. Your daughter-in-law has discovered the truth about the estate." Dona Catalina Montero, Alejandro's formidable mother, felt a chill run down her spine. "Impossible," she hissed. "That information was buried decades ago. How could she possibly? It seems her grandmother left her some sort of inheritance. What do you want us to do?" Catalina's eyes narrowed, her mind racing with the implications. "Do whatever it takes to stop her. The Montero legacy must be protected at all costs." As she hung up the phone, Catalina gazed out the window at the sprawling city below. She had spent a lifetime building and protecting the Montero Empire. She would not let some insignificant woman destroy everything now. Back at the bank, the tension in the small room was palpable. Alejandro's eyes darted between Esperanza and the damning documents on the table, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. "You're lying," he spat, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "This is some kind of trick. You've always been jealous of my family's success." Esperanza stood her ground, drawing strength from a well of courage she never knew she possessed. "Read it for yourself, Alejandro. Every word is true." Your grandfather stole everything from mine. The company, the fortune, it all rightfully belongs to my family. Alejandro lunged for the documents, but Lucia was quicker. She snatched them up, backing away from the enraged man. "Don't you dare touch her," she shouted, placing herself protectively in front of Esperanza. For a moment, it seemed Alejandro might resort to violence. But then, something in his eyes changed. The fury melted away, replaced by a look of dawning horror. "It can't be," he whispered, sinking into a nearby chair. "My whole life, everything I've ever believed about my family." Esperanza felt a pang of sympathy, despite everything he had put her through. She took a tentative step towards him. "Alejandro, I know this is a shock. But we can make this right. Together, we can." Her words were cut short as the door burst open once again. This time, it was Javier, Alejandro's loyal butler, his face pale with urgency. "Señor Montero," he gasped. "You must come quickly. Your mother, she's had a heart attack." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Alejandro stumbled to his feet. He cast one last, unreadable look at Esperanza before rushing out the door, leaving her and Lucia alone with the weight of their newfound knowledge. As the echo of Alejandro's footsteps faded, Esperanza turned to her friend, her eyes wide with a mix of determination and fear. "What do we do now, Lucia?" Lucia squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We fight, amiga. We fight for what's rightfully yours." Little did they know that their fight was about to become a battle for survival. For in the shadows, powerful forces were already moving against them, forces that would stop at nothing to keep the truth buried. Across the city, in a luxurious penthouse apartment, a phone rang. A well-manicured hand picked it up, the voice on the other end speaking in clipped, urgent tones. "Señorita Catalina, we have a situation. Your mother has been taken to the hospital, and your brother, he knows." Catalina Montero, Alejandro's younger sister and the family's best-kept secret weapon, felt a chill run down her spine. "Impossible," she hissed. "How could he possibly?" "It seems his wife, Esperanza, has uncovered some old documents." "What do you want us to do?" Catalina's eyes narrowed, her mind racing with the implications. "I'm on my way to the hospital. As for Esperanza, keep her under surveillance. I want to know her every move. And find out everything you can about this supposed evidence. We need to discredit it, and her, before she can do any real damage." As she hung up the phone, Catalina gazed at her reflection in the mirror. She had spent years cultivating her image as the perfect socialite, hiding her razor-sharp intellect and ruthless ambition behind a mask of frivolity. Now, it was time to show the world, and her family, what she was truly capable of. "Oh, Alejandro," she murmured, a cold smile playing on her lips. "You always were too soft. Don't worry, big brother. I'll clean up this mess for you, just like I always do." Meanwhile, in a small, run-down apartment on the outskirts of the city, an old man sat hunched over a rickety table, surrounded by stacks of newspapers and faded photographs. His gnarled hands trembled as he pored over the documents spread before him, his rheumy eyes widening in recognition. "After all these years," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "It's finally happening, Miguel. Your granddaughter is going to set things right." Rafael Ortiz had once been Miguel Fuentes' most trusted employee and closest friend. He had watched in helpless anguish as Fernando Montero's betrayal destroyed Miguel and tore apart two families. For decades, he had bided his time, gathering evidence and waiting for the right moment to expose the truth. Now, as he looked at a recent newspaper clipping featuring Esperanza's photo, he knew that moment had finally arrived. "I swore I'd help you get justice, old friend," Rafael said to the empty room. "And I intend to keep that promise." With renewed energy, the old man began to gather his precious documents. It was time to reach out to Esperanza and offer her the final pieces of the puzzle, pieces that would not only prove her claim to the Montero fortune but also expose a web of lies and deceit that went far beyond a simple business betrayal. As the sun began to set over Mexico City, casting long shadows across the bustling streets, the players in this high-stakes drama were each setting their plans in motion. Esperanza, armed with the truth and a newfound sense of purpose, was prepared to fight for her family's legacy. Alejandro, his world shattered by revelations he never saw coming, rushed to his mother's bedside, torn between loyalty to his family and the growing realization of the injustice that had shaped his entire life. Catalina Montero, the dark horse no one saw coming, was poised to enter the fray, her brilliant mind already formulating strategies to protect the empire she believed was her birthright. And in the wings, Rafael Ortiz held the key to secrets that could bring the entire Montero dynasty crashing down. As night fell over the city, Esperanza stood by the window in Lucia's small apartment, gazing out at the twinkling lights below. She clutched her grandmother's journal to her chest, feeling as though she were standing on the edge of a great precipice. "I never wanted any of this, Lucia," she said softly. "All I ever wanted was Alejandro's love. But now I have to fight. Not just for myself, but for my grandfather's memory. For justice." Lucia came to stand beside her, wrapping an arm around her friend's shoulders. "You're not alone in this fight, Esperanza. I'm with you, every step of the way." As the two women stood there, drawing strength from each other, neither could have imagined the storms that were gathering on the horizon. For the battle for the Montero fortune was about to begin in earnest, and before it was over, long-buried secrets would come to light, unlikely alliances would be forged, and Esperanza would be forced to confront not only her enemies but also the deepest desires of her own heart. In the coming days, the glittering world of Mexico City's elite would be turned upside down. Loyalties would be tested, hearts would be broken and mended, and at the center of it all, a woman once despised and discarded would rise to claim her destiny. For Esperanza Fuentes, the journey from neglected wife to the architect of her own fate was just beginning. And as she stood on the brink of this new chapter in her life, she felt a surge of determination coursing through her veins. "I am my grandmother's granddaughter," she whispered, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I am Miguel Fuentes' heir. And I will not be silenced anymore." Little did Esperanza know that her words, spoken in the quiet of that small apartment, were the opening salvo in a war that would reshape the lives of everyone around her. The woman despised by her husband was about to become the woman who would bring an empire to its knees, and in doing so, she would discover a strength and passion she never knew she possessed. As the city slept, the pieces were already in motion. In hospitals and penthouses, in run-down apartments and opulent mansions, the players in this grand drama were preparing for the battles to come. And at the heart of it all was a love story, not just between a man and a woman, but between a woman and her own sense of self-worth. For Esperanza, the night ahead would be one of preparation and introspection. But when the sun rose on a new day, she would step out into the world not as the meek and battered wife of Alejandro Montero, but as a force to be reckoned with, a woman determined to reclaim not just her family's legacy, but her own identity. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the curtain was about to rise on a drama that would captivate the entire city. For in the world of the wealthy and powerful, nothing is more thrilling or more dangerous than a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. As Esperanza finally drifted off to sleep, lulled by the distant sounds of the city she was about to shake to its very foundations, she had no way of knowing that across town, in a hospital room bathed in the harsh glow of fluorescent lights, Alejandro Montero was making a decision that would change both their lives forever. The game was afoot, and the stakes could not be higher. For in the cutthroat world of the Montero Empire, love and loyalty were commodities as valuable and as volatile as gold. And before this story reached its conclusion, every character would be forced to decide what they truly valued most: power, wealth, love, or redemption. The night grew deeper, and as Mexico City slumbered, the pieces continued to move on the grand chessboard of fate. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, and the first skirmishes in a war that would leave no one unchanged. But for now, in the quiet hours before dawn, the players in this high-stakes drama rested, each dreaming of the victories and the vengeance that the new day might bring. The dawn broke over Mexico City, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, oblivious to the storms brewing in the hearts of those caught in the web of the Montero family drama. Esperanza awoke with a start, her grandmother's journal clutched tightly to her chest. For a moment, she thought it had all been a dream, the letter, the revelations, the confrontation with Alejandro. But as reality settled in, she felt a mix of dread and determination wash over her. Today, she whispered to herself, everything changes. Across town, in the sterile confines of the hospital's private wing, Alejandro Montero had not slept a wink. He sat by his mother's bedside, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, his mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. The woman before him, once so formidable, now looked small and frail against the stark white sheets. "Oh, Mama," he murmured, "what have we done?" A soft knock at the door interrupted his reverie. Catalina glided in, every inch the picture of poise and concern. But Alejandro knew his sister well enough to see the calculated gleam in her eye. "How is she?" Catalina asked, her voice a perfect blend of worry and strength. Alejandro sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Stable, for now. The doctors say the next 24 hours are critical." Catalina nodded, then fixed her brother with a penetrating stare. "And what about you, hermano? How are you holding up?" For a moment, Alejandro considered lying, maintaining the facade of the strong, unflappable Montero heir. But the events of the past day had shaken him to his core. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Cat," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything I thought I knew about our family, about our legacy, it's all built on lies." Catalina's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "What are you talking about, Alejandro?" And so, in the quiet of the hospital room, with only their unconscious mother as witness, Alejandro told his sister everything, the documents Esperanza had found, the truth about their grandfather's betrayal, the rightful claim the Fuentes family had to the Montero fortune. As he spoke, Catalina's face remained an impassive mask, but her mind was racing. She had always known there were skeletons in the family closet, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. When Alejandro finished, she took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Hermano," she began, her tone gentle but firm, "you can't possibly believe all this. Esperanza has clearly fabricated these so-called documents in a pathetic attempt to get her hands on our family's fortune. She's taking advantage of you when you're at your most vulnerable." Alejandro shook his head, a hint of his old fire returning to his eyes. "You didn't see her face, Cat. You didn't read the letters. This is real. And if it is, God help us all." Catalina placed a comforting hand on her brother's shoulder, her mind already formulating plans within plans. "Let me handle this, Alejandro. You focus on Mama. I'll get to the bottom of Esperanza's little scheme." As she left the hospital, Catalina's gentle smile morphed into a look of steely determination. She pulled out her phone, dialing a number she rarely used. "It's me," she said when the call connected. "I need you to dig up everything you can on Esperanza Fuentes and her family. And I mean everything. Leave no stone unturned." Meanwhile, in a modest cafe across town, Esperanza sat across from Lucia, both women poring over the contents of Rosa Fuentes' safety deposit box. "I still can't believe all of this," Lucia said, shaking her head in wonder. "It's like something out of a novella." Esperanza managed a weak smile. "Believe me, I keep pinching myself, hoping to wake up from this bizarre dream. But it's real, Lucia. And now I have to decide what to do with this information." Before Lucia could respond, a shadow fell across their table. Both women looked up to see an elderly man standing before them, his rheumy eyes fixed on Esperanza with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Señorita Fuentes," he said, his voice quavering with age and emotion, "my name is Rafael Ortiz. I was a friend of your grandfather's. And I believe I have information that will help you in the fight ahead." As Rafael lowered himself into a chair, groaning softly at the effort, Esperanza felt a shiver run down her spine. She sensed that she was on the precipice of yet another life-altering revelation. "Tell me everything," she said, leaning forward eagerly. And so, as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, Rafael Ortiz began to weave a tale that would shake the foundations of the Montero Empire even further. He spoke of secret meetings, of documents hidden away for decades, of promises made and broken. With each word, Esperanza felt her resolve strengthening. This was no longer just about reclaiming her family's fortune, it was about righting a terrible wrong that had poisoned two families for generations. As Raphael's story unfolded, none of them noticed the nondescript man sitting at a nearby table, his attention seemingly focused on his newspaper but his ears straining to catch every word of their conversation. Catalina's network was vast, and her spies were everywhere. Across the city, in the opulent Montero mansion, Dona Catalina Montero stirred in her hospital bed. Her eyes fluttered open, taking in the worried face of her son. "Alejandro," she croaked, her voice weak but her gaze as sharp as ever. "What's happening? Why am I here?" Alejandro leaned in, clasping his mother's frail hand in his own. "You had a heart attack, Mama. The doctors say you need to rest." Catalina's eyes narrowed, sensing there was more her son wasn't telling her. "What aren't you saying, Mijo? I can see it in your eyes, something has happened." For a moment, Alejandro hesitated. Should he burden his ailing mother with the weight of these revelations? But as he looked into her eyes, he knew he couldn't lie, not anymore. The Montero family had been built on lies for too long. "Mama," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "there's something you need to know about Abuelo Fernando and the true origins of our family's fortune." As Alejandro began to recount the tale, Dona Catalina's face remained impassive, but her mind was racing. She had always feared this day would come, the day when the sins of the past would finally catch up with them. But she was a Montero, and Monteros didn't go down without a fight. "Enough," she said, cutting off Alejandro mid-sentence. With a strength that belied her frail appearance, she pushed herself up in the bed. "Get me out of this hospital. We have a war to plan." Meanwhile, back at the cafe, Esperanza was reeling from the information Rafael had shared. It wasn't just the Montero fortune that was at stake, there were political implications, connections to some of the most powerful families in Mexico. This was bigger than she could have ever imagined. "What do I do now?" she asked, looking between Rafael and Lucia, feeling overwhelmed by the weight of the task before her. Rafael reached out, patting her hand gently. "You fight, my dear. You fight with everything you have. Your grandfather never got the chance to reclaim what was rightfully his. But you can. You must." Lucia nodded in agreement, her eyes shining with determination. "And you won't fight alone, Esperanza. We're with you, every step of the way." As the trio bent their heads together, beginning to formulate a plan, the spy at the nearby table slipped away, eager to report back to Catalina. The battle lines were being drawn, and soon, all of Mexico City would be caught in the crossfire. Across town, in a luxurious penthouse overlooking the city, Catalina Montero was in full strategic mode. Her laptop was open, multiple phones lay scattered across her desk, and a corkboard on the wall was slowly filling with photos, documents, and red strings connecting various players in this high-stakes game. So, Esperanza thinks she can take on the Montero family, she mused, a cold smile playing on her lips. Let's see how she fares when she realizes just how deep this rabbit hole goes. With a few keystrokes, Catalina pulled up a file on her computer. The heading read Operation Checkmate, and as she scrolled through the detailed plans and contingencies, her smile grew wider. She had been preparing for a day like this for years, always suspecting that the family's carefully constructed facade might one day come crashing down. "Oh, Alejandro," she sighed, shaking her head. "You always were too soft-hearted for your own good. But don't worry, big brother. I'll make sure our family legacy remains intact, no matter the cost." As the day wore on, the various players in this unfolding drama moved their pieces across the board. Esperanza, armed with Rafael's knowledge and Lucia's unwavering support, began the process of reaching out to lawyers, journalists, and anyone else who might be able to help her case. She knew she was David going up against Goliath, but the fire of justice burned bright in her heart. Alejandro, torn between his love for his family and his growing sense of the injustice they had perpetrated, found himself at a crossroads. As he helped his mother settle back into the mansion, against medical advice, he couldn't shake the image of Esperanza's face when she had confronted him with the truth. The pain, the betrayal, but also the strength he had seen in her eyes, it haunted him. "Mama," he said hesitantly as he fluffed her pillows, what if Esperanza is right? What if our family really did steal everything from the Fuentes?" Dona Catalina fixed her son with a steely gaze. "Listen to me very carefully, Alejandro. In this world, there are two kinds of people, those who take what they want, and those who let it slip through their fingers. Your grandfather was a visionary. He saw an opportunity and he seized it. That's not theft, that's business." Alejandro frowned, unconvinced. "But the documents, the evidence can be discredited," Catalina interrupted smoothly. "Trust me, Mijo. By the time we're done, no one will believe a word that comes out of Esperanza's mouth. Now, be a good boy and fetch me my phone. We have calls to make." As Alejandro left the room, his heart heavy with doubt, Dona Catalina allowed herself a small smile of triumph. She had raised her son to be strong, to be a true Montero, but she had always known he had a weakness, his heart. It was why she had groomed Catalina in secret, preparing her daughter to be the true heir to the Montero legacy. Alejandro might wear the crown, but it would be Catalina who wielded the real power. Little did any of them know that fate had one more twist in store, a wild card that would upset all their carefully laid plans and alliances. In a small, cluttered office on the outskirts of the city, a lone figure hunched over a computer, fingers flying across the keyboard. Surrounded by stacks of old newspapers and dusty files, the woman's eyes gleamed with excitement as she pieced together the story of the century. Valentina Ruiz, an investigative journalist who had been chasing the truth behind the Montero empire for years, could hardly believe the information that was suddenly falling into her lap. Anonymous tips, leaked documents, whispers from sources she had cultivated over a decade, it was all coming together in an explosive exposé that would rock Mexican society to its core. "Got you," she whispered, a fierce grin spreading across her face as she clicked send on an email to her editor. "The Monteros won't know what hit them." As night fell over Mexico City, the players in this high-stakes drama settled in for an uneasy rest, each believing they held the upper hand. But as the first editions of tomorrow's newspapers rolled off the presses, bearing the headline Montero Empire, built on lies and betrayal, the game was about to change in ways none of them could have anticipated. Esperanza, lying awake in Lucia's spare room, felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration coursing through her veins. For years, she had been the meek, obedient wife, swallowing her pride and her pain. But now, as she clutched her grandmother's journal to her chest, she felt as though she were awakening from a long slumber. "I will make you proud, abuela," she whispered into the darkness. "I will reclaim our family's legacy, and I will do it with honor." Across town, in the Montero mansion, Alejandro tossed and turned, his dreams plagued by images of his grandfather's betrayal, of Esperanza's tearful accusations, of empires crumbling to dust. In his fitful sleep, he reached out, as if trying to grasp something just beyond his reach. "Esperanza," he murmured, a single tear sliding down his cheek. And in her penthouse command center, Catalina Montero sat bathed in the blue light of her computer screens, a glass of fine whiskey in hand, unaware that her meticulously crafted plans were about to be thrown into chaos. She raised her glass in a silent toast to her own cleverness, confident that she held all the cards. As the city slept, the stage was set for a confrontation that would leave no one unscathed. Loyalties would be tested, secrets would be exposed, and at the heart of it all, a woman once despised would rise to claim her destiny. The dawn would bring with it a new chapter in this twisting tale of love, betrayal, and redemption. And as the first rays of sunlight began to peek over the horizon, illuminating the sprawling cityscape, fate prepared to deal its next hand in the high-stakes game that would determine the future of the Montero Empire and the hearts of all those caught in its web. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Mexico City erupted into chaos. The headline of the day's newspaper, "Montero Empire, Built on Lies and Betrayal," blazed across newsstands and phone screens, sending shockwaves through the upper echelons of society. In the modest apartment she shared with Lucia, Esperanza awoke to the incessant buzzing of her phone. Bleary-eyed, she reached for it, only to gasp as she saw the flood of notifications. Messages from old friends, missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize, and most alarmingly, a terse text from Alejandro, "We need to talk. Now." "Lucia!" Esperanza called out, her voice trembling. "You need to see this." Her friend burst into the room, already clutching a copy of the newspaper. "Esperanza, it's everywhere. The story, the accusations, it's all out in the open." As the two women huddled over the explosive article, drinking in every word, Esperanza felt a dizzying mix of vindication and terror. The journalist, Valentina Ruiz, had laid bare the entire sordid history of the Montero family's rise to power, corroborating much of what Esperanza had learned from her grandmother's letters and Rafael's testimony. "This changes everything," Esperanza whispered, her mind racing. But how? Who could have leaked all this information? Across town, in the Montero mansion, a similar scene of panic was unfolding. Dona Catalina Montero, her face ashen with rage, barked orders into her phone while Alejandro paced the room, running his hands through his disheveled hair. "I want every copy of that rag burned," Catalina hissed. "Call our lawyers, our PR team. I want this story buried so deep it'll need an archaeological expedition to find it." Alejandro paused his frenetic pacing, turning to face his mother with a look of despair. "It's too late for that, Mama. It's all over social media. Everyone in Mexico City is talking about it." Catalina's eyes flashed dangerously. "Then we'll deny everything. We'll paint this Valentina Ruiz as a hack journalist looking for her 15 minutes of fame. And as for Esperanza," her voice dripped with venom as she spat out the name, "we'll make sure everyone knows she's nothing but a gold-digging liar who fabricated this whole story to get her hands on our fortune." But even as she spoke, Catalina knew the ground was shifting beneath their feet. Years of carefully cultivated alliances and meticulously hidden secrets were threatening to unravel in an instant. She needed to act fast, to regain control of the narrative before it spiraled completely out of her grasp. "Alejandro," she said, her voice softening as she turned to her son. "I need you to reach out to Esperanza. Bring her here. Perhaps if we present a united front, we can still salvage this situation." Alejandro's eyes widened in surprise. You want me to bring her here? After everything that's happened? Catalina nodded, a calculating gleam in her eye. Sometimes, Mijo, the best way to neutralize a threat is to keep it close. Besides, she added, her lips curving into a cold smile, I think it's time I had a little chat with my dear daughter-in-law. As Alejandro left to make the call, Catalina turned her attention to the other pressing matter at hand. With swift, decisive movements, she dialed a number known to only a select few. It's time, she said when the call connected. Initiate Operation Phoenix. And find out everything you can about this Valentina Ruiz. I want to know what rock she crawled out from under and how to send her scurrying back to it. Meanwhile, in a small, cluttered apartment across the city, Valentina Ruiz was riding the biggest high of her career. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since the story broke, with colleagues congratulating her and news outlets clamoring for interviews. But amid the chaos, a niggling worry gnawed at the back of her mind. She'd known the risks when she decided to publish the exposé. The Monteros were powerful, with tendrils reaching into every corner of Mexican society. But she'd underestimated just how quickly they'd move to discredit her. Already, she'd received word that several of her sources were retracting their statements, claiming they'd been misquoted or misunderstood. Her editor had called, sounding nervous, asking if she was absolutely sure about every detail in the story. Valentina's eyes flicked to the safe in the corner of her apartment, where she kept her most precious insurance policy, documents and recordings that would blow the lid off not just the Montero scandal, but corruption at the highest levels of Mexican politics and business. I need to move fast, she muttered to herself, reaching for her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she began drafting a follow-up piece. She had to strike while the iron was hot, before the Monteros could fully mobilize their considerable resources to bury the truth. Back in Lucia's apartment, Esperanza was grappling with a decision that would shape the course of her future. Alejandro's text message glowed on her phone screen, a digital olive branch in the midst of the storm. What are you going to do? Lucia asked, her voice laced with concern. You can't seriously be considering meeting with them, can you? It could be a trap. Esperanza closed her eyes, taking a deep breath to center herself. When she opened them again, there was a steely determination in her gaze that Lucia had never seen before. I have to go, Esperanza said softly. This might be my only chance to confront them face to face, to demand the truth and the justice my family deserves. Lucia grabbed her friend's hand, squeezing it tightly. Then I'm coming with you. You're not facing those vultures alone. As the two women prepared to leave, Esperanza's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Rafael Ortiz, be careful, child. The cornered animal is the most dangerous. Remember, you hold the truth, it is your most powerful weapon. Across the city, in a dimly lit bar far from his usual haunts, Alejandro Montero nursed a glass of whiskey, oblivious to the early hour. His mind was a battlefield of conflicting emotions, loyalty to his family warring with a growing sense of guilt and shame. Trouble in paradise, guapo, a sultry voice purred. Alejandro looked up to see a striking woman sliding onto the bar stool next to him. Her eyes, dark and mysterious, seemed to see right through him. You could say that, Alejandro muttered, taking another swig of his drink. The woman leaned in closer, her perfume a heady mix of jasmine and danger. Want to talk about it? Sometimes a stranger's ear is the best therapist. For a moment, Alejandro was tempted. The weight of his family's secrets, the guilt over his treatment of Esperanza, the fear of losing everything, it all threatened to crush him. But years of ingrained caution held his tongue. Thanks, but I should go, he said, standing abruptly. I have a family matter to attend to. As he hurried out of the bar, he missed the calculating smile that played across the woman's lips. She pulled out her phone, quickly tapping out a message. Target located. Proceeding to phase 2. In her luxurious penthouse, Catalina received the message with a grim smile. Everything was falling into place. Soon, she would have all the pieces she needed to not just weather the storm, but to emerge stronger than ever. Little did she know that fate had one more card to play, a wild card that would upset all her carefully laid plans. As Esperanza and Lucia made their way to the Montero mansion, tension thick in the air between them, neither woman noticed the nondescript car that pulled out behind them, following at a discreet distance. Inside the car, Rafael Ortiz gripped the steering wheel with gnarled hands, his rheumy eyes fixed on Esperanza's vehicle ahead. "I promised your grandfather I'd protect you, child," he murmured. "And Ortiz always keeps his promises." The Montero mansion loomed ahead, its imposing gates a physical manifestation of the barriers Esperanza had faced her entire married life. As the gates swung open to admit them, she felt a shiver run down her spine. Whatever happened beyond those gates would change the course of her life forever. In the mansion's opulent study, Dona Catalina Montero stood by the window, watching Esperanza's car approach. Her face was a mask of calm, but her eyes blazed with a fierce determination. She had not spent a lifetime building this empire only to see it crumble now. "Mama," Alejandro's voice came from behind her, hesitant and strained. "They're here." Catalina turned, fixing her son with a penetrating stare. "Remember the plan, Alejandro. Whatever happens, whatever is said, you must stand with your family. Blood is thicker than water, or marriage vows." Alejandro nodded, but the conflict in his eyes was clear. As he left to greet Esperanza, Catalina allowed herself a small sigh. She had always known her son's soft heart would be a liability. It was why she had worked so hard to groom her daughter, Catalina Jr., in secret. The girl had inherited her mother's steel spine and razor-sharp mind. Speaking of which, Catalina picked up her phone, dialing a familiar number. "Is everything in place?" she asked when the call connected. "Yes, Mama," came the cool, collected voice of her daughter. "I'm in position. The package is secure. Awaiting your signal." "Excellent," Catalina purred. "Stand by, my dear. The real show is about to begin." As she hung up, a slow, predatory smile spread across her face. Let Esperanza and her little friend think they were walking into a simple confrontation. They had no idea of the web they were truly entangled in. Meanwhile, in a small, nondescript office across town, Valentina Ruiz was putting the finishing touches on her follow-up story. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, fueled by a potent mix of caffeine and righteous anger. She had spent years chasing this story, and she wasn't about to let the Monteros bury it now. Just as she was about to hit send, a notification popped up on her screen. It was an email from an anonymous source, subject line, "The truth about Esperanza Fuentes." Valentina's heart raced as she opened the email. What she found inside made her jaw drop. If this information was legitimate, it would turn the entire story on its head. But could she trust it? And more importantly, could she afford not to investigate it? As the journalist grappled with her ethical dilemma, events at the Montero mansion were reaching a boiling point. Esperanza stood in the grand foyer, Lucia a comforting presence at her side, as Alejandro descended the sweeping staircase. For a moment, as their eyes met, time seemed to stand still. Despite everything that had happened, despite the lies and the betrayal, there was still a spark there, a reminder of the love they had once shared. But then Dona Catalina appeared at the top of the stairs, her regal bearing a stark contrast to Esperanza's simple attire, and the moment shattered. "Esperanza, my dear," Catalina called out, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How kind of you to join us. We have so much to discuss, don't we?" Esperanza straightened her spine, drawing strength from Lucia's supportive presence and the memory of her grandmother's courage. "Yes, Dona Catalina," she replied, her voice steady. "I believe we do." As the group moved towards the study, the air thick with unspoken tensions and hidden agendas, none of them were aware of the forces converging on the mansion. Rafael Ortiz, keeping watch from his car parked down the street. Catalina Jr., poised to strike from her hidden position. And in the distance, a fleet of police cars, sirens silent but lights flashing, racing towards the Montero estate. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of Mexican society and change the lives of everyone involved forever. As Esperanza stepped into the lion's den, she sent up a silent prayer, not for victory, but for the strength to face whatever lay ahead with dignity and grace. Little did she know that fate had one final, earth-shattering revelation in store, a truth so explosive it would redefine everything she thought she knew about herself, her family, and the Monteros. Inside the study, Dona Catalina gestured for Esperanza and Lucia to sit, while she remained standing, the physical embodiment of her perceived superiority. Alejandro hovered uncertainly between them, torn between his ingrained loyalty to his family and the growing realization of the injustices perpetrated in the name of the Montero legacy. "So, Esperanza," Catalina began, her voice silky smooth but with an undercurrent of steel, "I believe you have some concerns about our family's history. Perhaps we can clear up these unfortunate misunderstandings." Esperanza took a deep breath, steeling herself. This was her moment, her chance to stand up not just for herself, but for her family's long-buried truth. "There's no misunderstanding, Dona Catalina," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I have proof that your family's fortune was built on the betrayal of my grandfather. The Montero Empire rightfully belongs to the Fuentes family." Catalina's eyes flashed dangerously, but before she could respond, Alejandro stepped forward. "Is it true, Mama?" he asked, his voice tight with emotion. "Did Abuelo really steal everything from Esperanza's family?" For a moment, the room was thick with tension, the weight of decades of lies and secrets pressing down on all of them. Then, unexpectedly, Catalina laughed, a cold, mirthless sound that sent chills down Esperanza's spine. "Oh, my dear, naive children," she said, shaking her head. "You have no idea of the true game being played here, do you?" With a swift movement, she pressed a button on a remote control, and a hidden panel in the wall slid open, revealing a large screen. As it flickered to life, Esperanza gasped in shock. There, larger than life, was an image of her grandmother, Rosa Fuentes, standing arm in arm with Fernando Montero, Alejandro's grandfather. "You see," Catalina continued, her voice dripping with satisfaction, "the real story is so much more complicated than you could ever imagine." As the images on the screen changed, showing Rosa and Fernando in various intimate settings, Catalina began to weave a tale that shook Esperanza to her very core. It was a story of forbidden love, of sacrifice, and of a betrayal far deeper than anything Esperanza had suspected. "Your grandmother and my father-in-law were lovers," Catalina revealed, her eyes never leaving Esperanza's face. "The company, the fortune, it was all built together, in secret. But Rosa knew they could never be together openly. Society would never accept it. So she made the ultimate sacrifice, stepping aside to allow Fernando to marry my mother-in-law and secure the family's social standing." Esperanza felt as if the ground was shifting beneath her feet. But the letters, the documents." Catalina waved a dismissive hand. "A clever ruse, orchestrated by Rosa herself. She knew that one day, the truth might need to come out. So she left a trail, a way for her descendants to claim their rightful place in the Montero Empire." Alejandro, who had been listening with growing horror, turned to Esperanza. "Do you know what this means?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Esperanza nodded slowly, the realization dawning on her like a cold, gray dawn. We're cousins. Our grandfathers were brothers." The room fell into a shocked silence, the weight of this revelation pressing down on all of them. But Catalina wasn't finished. With a cruel smile, she delivered the final blow. "Oh, it gets better, my dears. You see, Rosa wasn't just carrying Fernando's child when she stepped aside. She was carrying twins." Esperanza's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Twins?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Catalina nodded, a triumphant gleam in her eye. "Yes, my dear. Twins. One child was raised as a Fuentes, your mother. And the other." She paused for dramatic effect, relishing the shock on everyone's faces. "The other was raised as a Montero. Alejandro's father." The room erupted into chaos. Lucia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Alejandro stumbled backwards, collapsing into a nearby chair, his face ashen. And Esperanza. Esperanza felt as though the world had tilted on its axis, everything she thought she knew about herself and her family shattering into 1,000 pieces. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in denial. "No, it can't be true. You're lying." But even as the words left her mouth, Esperanza knew in her heart that it was true. It explained so much, the strange connection she had always felt to Alejandro, the inexplicable sense of belonging she had felt in this house despite the cruel treatment she had endured. Catalina moved to the bar, pouring herself a drink with steady hands. "Oh, it's true, my dear. And it changes everything, doesn't it? Your righteous crusade for justice, your claim to the Montero fortune, it all crumbles to dust in the face of this truth. You're as much a Montero as any of us." Alejandro finally found his voice, looking up at his mother with a mixture of anger and betrayal. "How long have you known this, Mama? How long have you been keeping this secret?" Catalina sipped her drink, unruffled by her son's accusation. "I've always known, Mijo. It was my insurance policy, my way of keeping control over this family and its legacy. And now, it's our salvation. After all, Esperanza can hardly claim we stole her inheritance when she's been a part of this family all along, can she?" But Catalina had underestimated the strength that Esperanza had discovered within herself. Rising to her feet, her eyes blazing with a newfound determination, Esperanza faced her mother-in-law head-on. "You're wrong, Dona Catalina," she said, her voice steady and strong. "This changes nothing. If anything, it only strengthens my resolve. The Montero Empire was built by both our grandparents, which means it belongs to all of us, not just your branch of the family. And I will not rest until justice is served and the truth is known to all." Before Catalina could respond, the sound of sirens pierced the air, growing louder by the second. Lucia rushed to the window, her eyes widening in shock. "Dios mío! The police are here. And there are reporters, dozens of them." As if on cue, the study door burst open. Javier, the family's longtime butler, stood there, his usually impassive face etched with panic. "Señora Montero, Señor Alejandro, you need to see this." He switched on the large television mounted on the wall, and the room fell into a stunned silence as they watched the breaking news unfold. Valentina Ruiz, the investigative journalist who had broken the original story, was standing outside the Montero mansion, microphone in hand. "This is Valentina Ruiz, reporting live from the Montero estate," her voice rang out, clear and determined. "We have received shocking new information about the true origins of the Montero fortune and the secret that has torn two families apart for generations. Police are on the scene, and sources tell us that arrests are imminent. The question on everyone's lips, will the mighty Montero Empire crumble today?" As the reality of their situation sank in, the occupants of the study looked at each other, the weight of decades of lies and secrets pressing down on them. The carefully constructed world of the Monteros was unraveling at an alarming speed, and none of them knew quite where they would land when the dust settled. Catalina, her face a mask of fury, whirled on Esperanza. "You," she hissed. You did this. Somehow, you orchestrated all of this. But Esperanza shook her head, as surprised by this turn of events as anyone. No, Dona Catalina. I had nothing to do with this. It seems the truth has a way of coming out, no matter how deeply it's buried. As the sirens grew louder and the sound of car doors slamming echoed from the front of the mansion, Alejandro moved to stand beside Esperanza. In that moment, despite the shock and confusion of all they had learned, they presented a united front. What do we do now? Alejandro asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Esperanza took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. We face it. Together. It's time for the lies to end, for the whole truth to come out. Whatever happens next, we face it as a family, all of us. As footsteps thundered down the hallway towards the study, Esperanza reached out and took Alejandro's hand. Lucia moved to stand on her other side, a silent pillar of support. And as the door flew open, revealing a team of grim-faced police officers, the descendants of Rosa Fuentes and Fernando Montero stood together, ready to face the reckoning that had been generations in the making. The stage was set for a confrontation that would not only determine the fate of the Montero Empire but would also redefine the meaning of family, loyalty, and redemption. As cameras flashed and reporters clamored for statements, Esperanza felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. Whatever happened next, she knew that the days of being the woman despised by her husband were over. She had found her strength, her voice, and her truth. The game had changed, the players had shifted, but the ultimate prize, justice and the chance for a new beginning, was still within reach. As Esperanza prepared to step into the spotlight and tell her story to the world, she sent up a silent prayer to her grandmother. Guide me, Abuela, she whispered. Help me make this right. Little did she know that the biggest revelation of all was yet to come, a truth so shocking it would change everything she thought she knew about herself, her family, and the true nature of power and love. The Montero mansion, once a bastion of power and secrecy, had become a circus. Police cars lined the driveway, their lights painting the manicured lawns in flashes of red and blue. Reporters jostled for position, their cameras trained on the ornate front doors, waiting for the moment when the Montero family would emerge and face the world. Inside, in the study that had moments ago been the stage for earth-shattering revelations, Esperanza stood tall, her hands still clasped in Alejandro's. The police officers filled the room, their presence a stark reminder of how quickly the mighty could fall. Dona Catalina Montero, the lead officer announced, his voice cutting through the tense silence, you are under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. As the officer began to read Catalina her rights, the matriarch's face contorted with fury. This is preposterous, she spat. Do you have any idea who I am? Who we are? The Montero name has stood for generations. You can't possibly think. Mama, Alejandro interrupted, his voice soft but firm. It's over. The truth is out. It's time to face the consequences. Catalina's eyes widened in disbelief, darting between her son and Esperanza. For a moment, it seemed as though she might collapse under the weight of it all. But then, like a cornered animal, she lashed out. You fools, she hissed. You think this is the end? You have no idea of the forces you're dealing with. The Montero Empire stretches far beyond this family, beyond this country even. You'll see. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. As the police led Catalina away, Esperanza felt a strange mix of emotions wash over her. There was relief, yes, at seeing justice finally being served. But there was also a deep sadness for the woman who had been her mother-in-law, who had carried this burden of secrets for so long. Señor Montero, Señora Fuentes Montero, the lead officer said, turning to Esperanza and Alejandro. We'll need you both to come down to the station to give your statements. Esperanza nodded, squaring her shoulders. "Of course, officer. We have nothing to hide. Not anymore." As they prepared to leave, Lucia stepped forward, embracing Esperanza tightly. "I'll be right here waiting for you, amiga," she whispered. "Stay strong." The journey from the mansion to the police station was a blur of flashing cameras and shouted questions. Esperanza sat in the back of the police car, Alejandro beside her, both lost in their own thoughts. The weight of their shared heritage, the revelation of their true relationship, hung heavy between them. At the station, they were separated for questioning. Esperanza found herself in a small, stark room, facing a detective with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Señora Fuentes Montero," the detective began, "please, tell us everything. From the beginning." And so, Esperanza did. She spoke of finding her grandmother's letter, of the revelations about the true origins of the Montero fortune. She recounted the years of emotional abuse she had endured, the way she had been made to feel worthless and unwanted. And finally, she shared the shocking truth they had all learned just hours ago, the tangled web of family secrets that tied the Fuentes and Montero families together. As she spoke, Esperanza felt as though a great weight was lifting from her shoulders. For so long, she had carried the burden of her silence, of her compliance in the face of injustice. Now, with each word, she reclaimed her power, her voice. In another room, Alejandro was going through a similar process. But for him, each revelation was like a dagger to his heart. The father he had idolized, the grandfather he had revered, both were revealed to be men capable of great deception. And his mother, the depth of her manipulation stunned him. As the hours wore on and the questioning continued, neither Esperanza nor Alejandro were aware of the drama unfolding outside the police station. Valentina Ruiz, the intrepid journalist who had broken the story, was camped out front, providing live updates to a captivated nation. But even as she reported on the fall of the Montero Empire, her investigative instincts were on high alert. Something about this whole situation didn't sit right with her. The pieces fit together too neatly, the revelations too conveniently timed. "There's more to this story," she muttered to herself during a commercial break. "And I'm going to find out what it is." Meanwhile, in a sleek, high-rise office across town, a group of men in expensive suits watched the unfolding events with growing concern. "This is a disaster," one of them growled, slamming his fist on the polished conference table. "If the Monteros go down, they could take us all with them." Another man, older and calmer, leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Perhaps," he mused, "this situation presents an opportunity. With Catalina out of the way, there's a power vacuum. And nature abhors a vacuum, gentlemen." As the men began to plot and scheme, none of them noticed the quiet figure who slipped out of the room. In a secluded corner, Catalina Jr., the secret weapon Dona Catalina had been grooming for years, pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "It's me," she said when the call connected. "Things are moving faster than we anticipated. It's time to activate the contingency plan." Back at the police station, Esperanza had finished giving her statement. As she was led back to the waiting area, she caught sight of Alejandro being escorted from his own interview. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the air between them crackled with unspoken emotions. Before either of them could speak, a commotion at the front desk drew their attention. An elderly man was arguing with the desk sergeant, his voice rising in frustration. "You don't understand," he was saying. "I have crucial information about the Montero case. I need to speak with someone immediately." Esperanza's heart leapt as she recognized the voice. "Rafael?" she called out, moving towards him. Rafael Ortiz turned, his weathered face lighting up at the sight of her. "Esperanza, my child. Thank God you're all right. I came as soon as I heard the news." As Rafael was allowed through, Esperanza introduced him to Alejandro. The old man's eyes widened as he took in the family resemblance, the pieces clicking into place. "So it's true then," he murmured. "The rumors I've heard about your true relationship." Esperanza nodded, a sad smile on her face. "It's all true, Rafael. But I have a feeling you're here because there's more to the story." "What is it? What do you know?" Rafael glanced around nervously, then leaned in close. "Not here," he whispered. "It's not safe. There are forces at work here that go far beyond the Montero family. We need to go somewhere private, somewhere we can talk freely." Just then, a young officer approached them. "Señora Fuentes Montero, Señor Montero," he said, "you're free to go for now. But please don't leave the city. We may have more questions for you in the coming days." As they were led out of the station, Esperanza's mind was reeling. What could Rafael possibly know that was so dangerous it couldn't be spoken of here? And what did he mean by forces beyond the Montero family? The moment they stepped outside, they were assaulted by a wall of noise and flashing lights. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions and thrusting microphones in their faces. "Señora Fuentes Montero, how does it feel to learn you're a true Montero? Señor Montero, will you be stepping down from your position in the company? Is it true that your marriage was arranged to keep the family's secrets?" Esperanza felt overwhelmed, the cacophony of voices making her head spin. But then, cutting through the chaos, came a voice she recognized. "Esperanza! Alejandro! Over here!" It was Valentina Ruiz, the journalist who had broken the story. Something in her eyes, a mix of urgency and concern, made Esperanza pause. "Please," Valentina said, her voice low and intense. "I know you have no reason to trust me, but I think I've uncovered something big. Something that could change everything. We need to talk." Esperanza looked at Alejandro, then at Rafael. In that moment, she made a decision that would alter the course of their lives once again. "Okay," she said, drawing herself up to her full height. "But not here. We'll go somewhere private, somewhere safe. And then, all of you are going to tell me exactly what's going on." As they made their way through the crowd, none of them noticed the nondescript van parked across the street, or the man inside who spoke quietly into a headset. "Targets are on the move. Should we intervene?" A woman's voice, cool and collected, came through the earpiece. "No. Follow them. Let's see where this leads. The game is far from over." In the back of the van, Catalina Jr. allowed herself a small smile. Her mother might be in custody, but the true power behind the Montero empire was still very much at large. And she had no intention of letting her carefully laid plans be derailed by a few inconvenient truths. As the van pulled out to follow Esperanza and her unlikely allies, the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the foundations of Mexican society and redefine the meaning of family, loyalty, and power. Little did any of them know that the biggest revelation was yet to come, a truth so shocking it would change everything they thought they knew about themselves and the world they lived in. The woman once despised by her husband was about to become the key player in a game with stakes higher than she could have ever imagined. And as the sun began to set over Mexico City, casting long shadows across the streets, Esperanza Fuentes Montero steeled herself for whatever lay ahead. The truth, in all its complexity and pain, was finally coming to light. And nothing would ever be the same again. The sun had long since set over Mexico City, its sprawling expanse now a glittering tapestry of lights. In a secluded safe house on the outskirts of the city, an unlikely group had gathered: Esperanza Fuentes Montero, her husband Alejandro, the journalist Valentina Ruiz, and the elderly Rafael Ortiz. The air was thick with tension and unspoken truths. Esperanza paced the room, her mind reeling from the events of the past few days. From despised wife to heir of an empire, from a woman seeking justice to one at the center of a web of lies and deceit that spanned generations. She turned to face the others, her eyes blazing with determination. "Enough secrets," she said, her voice steady and strong. "I want the truth. All of it. Now." Raphael was the first to speak, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he pulled a worn leather notebook from his jacket. "My dear," he began, "what I'm about to tell you goes far beyond the Montero family. It involves corruption at the highest levels of government, international conspiracies, and a truth so explosive it could reshape the entire country." As Raphael began to weave his tale, Esperanza felt the ground shift beneath her feet once more. The notebook, it turned out, had belonged to her grandmother, Rosa Fuentes. In it were detailed accounts of not just the love affair with Fernando Montero, but of a vast network of powerful families and corporations that had been manipulating Mexican politics and economy for decades. The Montero Empire, Raphael explained, was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Your grandparents, they were trying to expose it all, to bring down the entire corrupt system. But they were discovered. Valentina leaned forward, her journalistic instincts on high alert. "That's why Rosa stepped aside, isn't it? It wasn't just about societal expectations. She was protecting her family." Raphael nodded solemnly. "Exactly. The forces they were up against, they threatened to destroy everything and everyone the Fuentes and Monteros held dear. So Rosa and Fernando made the ultimate sacrifice. They separated, buried the truth, and hoped that one day, someone would be strong enough to finish what they started." Alejandro, who had been silent until now, spoke up, his voice thick with emotion. "And that someone is Esperanza, isn't it? That's why my mother was so threatened by her. She knew, she must have known all along." As the full weight of this revelation settled over the room, a new voice cut through the tension. Well. Isn't this a cozy little gathering?" All heads turned to see Catalina Jr. standing in the doorway, a cold smile playing on her lips and a gun held steadily in her hand. Behind her, two burly men in suits blocked the exit. "I must say, I'm impressed," Catalina Jr. continued, sauntering into the room. "You've managed to piece together quite a bit of the puzzle. But I'm afraid your little quest for truth and justice ends here." Esperanza stepped forward, placing herself between Catalina Jr. and the others. "Who are you?" she demanded. "What do you want?" Catalina Jr.'s smile widened. "Oh, dear cousin. I'm the ace up my mother's sleeve. The one she's been grooming all these years to take over when the time was right. And as for what I want..." She gestured around the room with her free hand. "All of this. The empire, the power, the truth, all of it." As Catalina Jr. began to outline her plans, how she would use the information in Rosa's notebook to blackmail the most powerful people in Mexico, how she would rebuild the Montero Empire stronger than ever, Esperanza's mind raced. She caught Alejandro's eye, saw the same determination reflected there that she felt in her own heart. In that moment, with the stakes higher than ever, Esperanza made a decision. She would not let her grandparents' sacrifice be in vain. She would not allow this cycle of corruption and deceit to continue. With a subtle nod to Alejandro, Esperanza launched into action. In one fluid motion, she grabbed a heavy vase from a nearby table and hurled it at Catalina Jr. The unexpected move caught the woman off guard, causing her to stumble and misfire her gun. Chaos erupted in the room. Alejandro tackled one of the suited men, while Raphael, showing surprising agility for his age, tripped the other. Valentina dove for Catalina Jr.'s dropped gun, sliding across the floor and snatching it up. In the midst of the melee, Esperanza's eyes locked onto Rosa's notebook, which had fallen to the floor. She lunged for it, knowing that within its pages lay the key to unraveling decades of corruption and injustice. As she grasped the notebook, Esperanza felt a hand close around her ankle. She looked down to see Catalina Jr., her face contorted with rage, trying to pull her back. "You don't understand," Catalina Jr. snarled. "The power this information holds, we could rule everything. We could have it all." Esperanza met her gaze, and in that moment, she saw not just Catalina Jr., but the reflection of every person who had ever been corrupted by the allure of power and wealth. She saw the path that had led her own family to this point, the choices that had torn them apart. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, Esperanza kicked free of Catalina Jr.'s grasp. "No," she said firmly. "We don't want it all. We want justice. We want the truth." Just then, the sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder by the second. Valentina, who had managed to call for help during the scuffle, stood by the window, the gun still trained on Catalina Jr. and her men. "It's over," Valentina said, a note of triumph in her voice. "The police are here, and they're not alone. I've got a team of international investigators on their way. Everything, all the evidence, all the names, it's already been sent to trusted sources around the world. There's no stopping the truth now." As the police burst into the room, Esperanza felt a wave of relief wash over her. But it was tempered by the knowledge that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long and difficult, filled with legal battles, public scrutiny, and the monumental task of dismantling a system of corruption that had been in place for generations. In the days and weeks that followed, Mexico was rocked by a series of revelations that shook the very foundations of its political and economic systems. Esperanza, with Alejandro by her side, became the face of a movement for transparency and justice. They testified before courts and committees, shared their story with the world, and worked tirelessly to right the wrongs of the past. The Montero Empire, once built on secrets and lies, was dismantled and rebuilt with a new purpose. Esperanza and Alejandro used their resources and influence to establish foundations for education, healthcare, and social justice, honoring the original vision their grandparents had held for a better Mexico. Valentina's exposé, backed by the evidence from Rosa's notebook and Rafael's testimony, won international acclaim and sparked investigations across the globe. She became a symbol of journalistic integrity and the power of truth in the face of corruption. Rafael, his lifelong mission finally accomplished, found peace in knowing that his friend Miguel Fuentes' legacy would live on through Esperanza. He spent his remaining years as a trusted advisor to the couple, sharing stories of the past and helping to guide their vision for the future. As for Catalina Jr. and the other conspirators, they faced the full force of the law. The trials that followed became some of the most high-profile cases in Mexican history, exposing decades of corruption and leading to sweeping reforms across the country. Through it all, Esperanza and Alejandro's relationship evolved. The revelation of their true connection had initially been a shock, but as they worked together to bring the truth to light, they discovered a deep bond that transcended romantic love. They became partners in the truest sense, united by their shared heritage and their commitment to justice. 1 year to the day after Esperanza had found her grandmother's fateful letter, she stood on the balcony of the Montero mansion, now transformed into a community center for education and social services. Alejandro joined her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Can you believe how much has changed?" he asked, gazing out over the city they both loved. Esperanza smiled, covering his hand with her own. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it myself. But then I remember my grandmother's words, 'You are destined for greatness.'" "She was right," Alejandro said softly. "You are the strongest person I know, Esperanza. You took a legacy of lies and turned it into a force for good. I'm proud to stand beside you." As they stood there, watching the sunset over Mexico City, Esperanza felt a sense of peace she had never known before. The woman who had once been despised by her husband had become a beacon of hope for an entire nation. She had faced her fears, uncovered the truth, and in doing so, had not only reclaimed her own power but had given a voice to countless others who had been silenced by corruption and greed. The journey had been long and fraught with danger, but as Esperanza looked to the future, she knew that the greatest chapters of her story, and the story of her beloved Mexico, were yet to be written. In the quiet of the evening, with the city spread out before them like a glittering tapestry, Esperanza made a silent vow. She would continue to fight for justice, to shine a light on the darkest corners of society, and to honor the sacrifices of those who had come before her. The Montero Fuentes legacy would be one of truth, compassion, and unwavering courage in the face of adversity. As night fell and the stars began to twinkle overhead, Esperanza and Alejandro turned to go back inside, where their team was waiting to discuss the next phase of their social initiatives. But before they left the balcony, Esperanza paused, looking up at the sky with a soft smile. "Gracias, abuela," she whispered. "For everything." And somewhere, in the great beyond, Rosa Fuentes and Fernando Montero smiled down on their grandchildren, knowing that their dream of a better world was finally, after so many years, becoming a reality. The woman who had been despised by her husband had become the architect of her own destiny, a champion for truth, and a symbol of hope for all those who dared to stand up against injustice. Her story would be told for generations to come, inspiring others to find the strength within themselves to fight for what is right, no matter the cost. As Esperanza closed the balcony doors behind her, she knew that this was not the end of her journey, but rather the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with purpose, love, and the unshakable belief that one person, armed with the truth and the courage to speak it, could change the world.